Hello everyone, welcome to Art Lounge Alley. This is Figure Drawing Basics, part 69. I'm your host, and I will be jumping into today's lesson right away, actually. I am going to skip the Patreon page intro for today, but you guys can check it out. It's in the About section of the Twitch channel. You'll see it all the way on the right hand side along with other social media links. So today I am just going to jump into the stream. And this is going to be great because it's going to give me more time to actually draw. But I will be doing a review for newcomers tomorrow. Throughout the week, just to give you guys an idea of like what each tier is and what to expect and that sort of thing. There is a new process video that's been uploaded to the Patreon page. You guys can check that out. It's from start to finish of something that hasn't been posted on any of the social media links up until recently. So you guys can check that out. All right, so where did we leave off last week? Last week we were doing chins. So I'm going to continue on with that work. Just a brief overview from last week. This is where we left off, and it was predominantly focused on the placement of the ear on the face. This drawing right here just demonstrates where you should look to make the ear starting point and end point. So it's starting from the eyebrow line. As you can see here, the eyebrows line up on it, and it's also where the tip of the ears are, and they go all the way down to where the nostrils are, and they line up there as well. And just to give you guys a better idea of how important it is when you're first starting out to draw these guidelines so that your eyes could get used to the placement of all the features on a face, and just make sure things are leveled. So for example, in this case, you want to make sure that the bottom of the ear lines up with the other ear at the bottom as well. If you're doing a straight shot like this, where it's not for sure, it's not an angled shot, there isn't any sort of perspective on it or anything like that, you want to make sure that you draw it correctly, that the face is leveled. And symmetry is one of the things to look out for when you're learning to draw, the face, when you're learning to draw the body. It's very important. It sharpens your skill, it sharpens your understanding of the figure, and just as I mentioned, you get your eye used to seeing the figure in its proper proportions. And then from there, you can exaggerate things, of course. And you guys can see at the bottom over here, there's like many examples of different features. For example, the chin, the mouth, how the mouth is in perspective, nose, all of that varies. But once you understand these fundamental principles that pretty much apply to any sort of face, for example, when you have this line down the middle, you could see that the nose is evenly split down the middle on each side. They're both the same on either side. And the same thing for the lips as well. When you split it down, you're able to understand where the placement is of the lips in comparison to where the nose is in this perspective. So you could see that it evenly splits the nose down the middle, and it evenly splits the lips down the middle, which allows you to compare both sides and to see that they are identical to each other. It also allows you, these guidelines allow you to get used to things like, for example, you see these corners on the jawline, these corners right here, they also line up. That's a big mistake that people make as well when they're drawing. They don't pay attention to these sides equaling each other, mirroring each other. As well as the placement of the eyes. You don't want one eye to be higher or lower than the other one. That breaks the drawing. That's something that takes the viewer out of the experience of admiring your work. It just kind of seems like you skipped over a lot of the features just to get a finished product, as opposed to really taking time to understand all these proportions. And, when you do rush through it, you're only rushing through it, and it's a disservice to you. You're rushing through it, and next time you sit down to draw a face, you're going to do the same thing. So it's better that you learn all this at the beginning, the proper method, the proper understanding of all these figures. Maybe it's more technical than you would expect when it comes to drawing, right? Because a lot of us, when we're raised, we're thought of drawing and art in general as this like free-spirited, chaotic sort of form of expression. And when we see people drawing who are really good at it, they're just starting anywhere and they're building up all these beautiful images. But what we don't see is all the years and months and weeks they spend practicing the craft and getting really good at understanding all these fundamentals. So just like, all your training wheels for other things, like for example, for reading, for writing, all those training wheels fell off at some point, and you stopped being incredibly technical, and you became faster, and it became second nature to you almost. So the same thing happens here. You first have to do things with the training wheels being these guidelines and all these principles and rules, basically, understanding the distance between the tip of the nose and the mouth, understanding the distance between the corner of the eye and the nostrils, understanding how the head is the unit of measurement for the entire body. Like all those rules, all those principles of drawing eventually allow you to just drop the training wheels, and you could construct a well-drawn image. So yeah, that pretty much does it. And then, just seeing here also in profile, it's the same idea. You're still following the same ideas and rules as you see here. The eyebrow line is the line where the ear forms, and the tip of the nose is where the ear ends. And as you can see, it's also angled with this vertical line just forming a corner to allow you to see where this diagonal line goes, to give you an idea of like how the ear is angled. And if you take a look and see, really, it's evenly split down the middle of the ear. So when you are forming the ear, you could see, okay, well, this part should be about the same width as this part as well. And just drawing different sort of perspectives as well. This is the back of the ear, this is from the back of the head, let's just say. All this allows you to improve your drawing skills in general. You're practicing shading, you're practicing noticing details, you're practicing other principles that I spoke about, which are drawing lightly, not keeping your hand too close to the tip of the pencil. That obstructs your vision. It makes you way more technical. And something that I experienced actually with inking as well, and I've noticed that my hand tends to slip down towards the bottom for the sake of maintaining more control over the pencil, or rather over the brush, over the lines that I'm making. It's kind of like the example of, like, for instance, if you were to hold a broom at the very tip of the end of the broom and try to hold it straight, your hand is going to get a little bit wobbly, right? But if you bring it closer towards the end of the broom, your hand slides all the way closer towards the end of the broom, you have more leverage, you're able to control it easier, it's not as wobbly. So it's kind of the same idea, except with the pencil, it's a lot lighter, but the same thing happens. The uncertainty of how much control you have over the pencil starts to get greater and greater the further up the pencil you go, and decreases the further down you go to it. You tend to be able to do it a lot more. You have more control over the tip as opposed to from a distance. But the more you practice doing it from a distance, the easier it becomes. And the multiple benefits of drawing from a distance is you're able to see the entire image, as opposed to when your hand is obstructing your vision of the image. You're able to sketch everything out at a lighter pace. You're not pressing really hard on the paper, and yeah, just it's more of a free-flowing sort of experience with it. And like I said, the more you practice using that technique, the easier it becomes, and it becomes a preferable method. I'd rather just be able to see the entire image and sketch lightly than get really meticulous and detailed and start really pressing down on the paper. It becomes almost like a rigid experience when you do the former. When you hold it towards the tip, you press more on a pencil, you press more on a paper. So yeah, all these exercises, despite you not being able to remember like every single little line and detail on here, these exercises allow you to practice all these things I just mentioned. Drawing lightly, not holding the pencil too close to the tip, practicing all these different guidelines, etc. But yeah, and then going back to the chin, as you guys could see, there's so much variation to it. There isn't really any standard way of teaching. The most important thing you can do for yourself is draw this line down the middle to make sure that both halves are identical to each other. Everything else really comes in variety, so you just have to draw a lot of people, you just have to draw a lot of figures, practice for photos, and your eye will understand the relationship between parts of the face better. In certain cases, if you bring up the mouth way too high and the chin is way too big, it's going to start to look like caricature rather than you being able to really nail down the likeness of the figure. You want to hone your skill. You want to be able to get more accurate. You want to be able to sync your hand and eye coordination. So if you're looking at a realistic image and you're trying to draw it on paper, it heavily depends on your hand and eye syncing. So what you're seeing, you're telling your hand to do on paper as well. And that's really the benefit of drawing from real life, from drawing from references and photos and stuff, is you're increasing that ability. You're training that skill, whereas if you take shortcuts, you don't really pay attention to these little details, you don't pay attention to the relationship between objects, you don't notice all these things, you're slowing down your improvement, you're slowing down your development of hand-eye coordination and connection. So yeah, just draw a lot of faces, practice all these different types as well. I am going to be uploading these pages as well for you guys to have content to draw from. You don't want to keep drawing the same thing over and over again. That becomes boring and stifling in some ways. So I'm going to be uploading more of these figure pages for you guys to practice from, try to copy. And yeah, with that said, I'm going to continue on with drawing parts of the chin, parts of the face. So here I was just demonstrating what these features on the face end up looking like for a younger face. So it's the same idea. The most important thing is to pay attention to the angle of these features. So the upper part of the lip, bottom part of the lip, and the chin. How they connect, but they connect at an angle. It's not just straight down. This line right here just represents that. Notice how the straight line going down doesn't connect all the features. It might connect some, but for instance, the forehead doesn't touch that straight line going down. The only thing that's touching it is the nose, the most prominent part of the face, and maybe the upper lip. That varies as well. But the bottom part of the lip, the chin, they're much further away from this from this vertical line. And that's an important note, because if you look at some of the drawings, a lot of people tend to draw the face in profile, and all the features kind of line up against this straight line going down, and that's a no-no. The face is rounded. The features on the face give it more curvature, kind of. So yeah, I'm just going to continue with drawing another feature. Just doing a quick sketch, laying down where certain features are. Making sure the distance between these face features aren't incredibly drastic. I don't know about you guys, but I am personally looking forward to this week. I'm spending a lot of time. In fact, over the weekend, I spent some time working more on the special intro that I mentioned last week. And the more I work on it, the more I realize, like, man, there's so much here. Like, it's a pretty condensed book. In terms of text goes, it's pretty condensed. Like, there's a, if you really wanted to grasp what they're talking about, like, there's so much history that plays into it. If you were to spend time and just look up some of the artists that they mention in the book and, like, take in their work, study it, and think about the history of it, how it all developed. I'm just incredibly impressed at how condensed it is. Despite it not being too many pages, the amount of information on there really makes it a long read. If you were doing it the way I was doing it, which is like by going and looking at each one that they're mentioning and looking at all their work and kind of trying to recognize the individualistic style, and just paying attention to that, thinking about the timeline of what they were doing and, like, the subject matter and that era and what was considered to be important of the times, and there's just a lot that goes into it. So that was predominantly my weekend, along with working on other projects. But as it's coming along, it seems like I might have to just break it up into like a week-long thing. I don't know. It really depends on how I'm going to shape all this. Originally I started out thinking, let me just do like an quick intro, give you some highlights about who the artist is, what their background is like, and then jump into like their work and really talk about the work. But as I started I guess rereading it, because I haven't really touched the book in years. This is something that I've had for, I don't know, maybe 15 years or not. And prior, I would just mainly look at the art and admire the work and, that sort of thing. I didn't really spend as much time on the text. So this is what I'm doing this time around. I'm actually really reading it and like investing a lot of time in researching what they're talking about there, connecting it with history, that sort of thing. So the first few streams should be pretty interesting because they're going to introduce pretty much the trajectory of the artist and just give you guys an idea of like illustration in America. I'm going to say this as an important note. It's about illustration in America, not in general. It's going to date back to the first image of the subject that I'm going to be presenting, and going forward from there into modern day. And if you really, I don't know, for me personally, some people might disagree and they'll think like, oh, well, that is a really long time ago. But to think about it, 200 years, it isn't that long, in terms of how slow things are when it comes to progress and shedding old, outdated values, and stuff that we're seeing even now in politics, how just like all those like old generations having a hissy fit over how things are progressing and regressing into like turn of the century kind of era. Just seeing how slow that has been. I really don't see 200 years being that long. It's just like what, 3 generations maybe. If even. But yeah, we still have people who were, either born in the early 1900s, and their family members making decisions based on those times. And their family members were born even earlier. They were born in like 1800s. So it's like what they were raised on were based on those principles and those times and those values. So, that I just don't see that era, the 1800s, late 1800s, mid 1800s. I don't see that era too far away from current day, 2022. It's still, just like an earshot away from that generation, or that the generation that was raised on the values and principles of the 1800s, those kind of things. So yeah, just considering that, that generation hasn't left really and isn't so far away. The stuff that they talk about in a book, how things have progressed illustration wise, it's pretty fascinating because we're still relatively close to that time period. No, like for instance, people who are running certain companies or corporations or whatever, they inherited a lot of it. There are people who inherited from an older generation. So, usually they would live up to like 80s, right? So you subtract 80 years from now, it's like 1920. Around that era, and then they inherited, or that time period allowed them to like really develop the business, and of course they're gonna pass down that business if the person follows their principles and values, right? If that person is there and they're pledging their loyalty basically to the person who owns the business, who's been running the business. So like if I was, let's say I started the business in like late 1800s, um, 20 years later, it's 1900s, 40 years later, it's 1940s. So, by then I'm passing it off to somebody new, of my family members or whatever. So I'm probably like 80 years old by then, and this new member takes this new business, but the only way they were going to inherit the business was if they were to follow the things that I was doing and paying debt to people who've helped grow that business, which who knows what kind of political affiliation that was, right? I mean, we kind of know. So that relationship continues, and them having to appease that relationship continues. So it's just this chain, this chain that keeps it going in a way. So just when you think oh, well, it's 2020, what are people doing thinking like that? Well, a lot of them are still running businesses, and behaviors and values and their principles are all chained to these relationships, so yeah, that's what I mean. We're not too far away from that period, time and generation. It's still making a lot of the decisions. That generation hasn't completely gone away, and the way they're keeping themselves alive is through these trust funds and inheritance and well, you got to do it my way, otherwise you don't get any of it, that sort of thing. So of course people are allowing themselves to be brainwashed by those values. And yeah, it's still happening now. What they were thinking about back then as important is still prevalent nowadays. And this book is kind of going to highlight it. I'm going to talk about it more. I'm going to discuss that that era, that period, and just in terms of history, how that how it all progressed to modern day now. So I'm pretty excited about it, and at the same time, it's a lot of work there. So I'm aiming to have the first part hopefully done by Wednesday. To introduce the first half of it on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. So that's been pretty much my weekend, and then I also been working more, actually a lot more, on the personal project of mine, that you guys see on the project stream. So I got a lot of it done. I'm pretty excited about it, actually. It's up to the next stage. I wanted to record stuff, but at the same time I wanted to just take a break, from OBS, especially with OBS being pretty capricious these past few days. I just kind of wanted to sit there and focus on illustration and not think about software issues and all that stuff. But it hasn't gone too much ahead. Tomorrow's stream, that's when I'm going to be doing a project stream. You guys will see how much of it has been done in the next stage. And also reading about all these different artists and just looking at their work and seeing how much of it is just absolutely amazing. Like, just the style that develops from it and the dedication as well. And I kind of started thinking about like, well, that time era, that period, and a lot of these artists in this book specifically, and they're talking about like early 1900s, some of them late 1800s as well. But I was just kind of curious, like modern day now, we have so much distraction, which is basically social media and the internet. Pretty much everybody comes home and either they're looking at the screen on their TV, playing video games, watching shows, Netflix, social media, your phone, games on the phone. Everybody's kind of like plugged into it in that sense. So this idea of having distractions around is, I think, like astronomically different than that era. Like, what would be an equal comparison to it? Like, I guess television was at the time like the most distracting thing, like early 1900s. Like, but aside from that, like, what was it that people would have done that is comparable to like social media now? I wonder what that activity was back then. Like, oh, they read a lot. That was their distraction or something. I mean, I highly doubt that was the case as well. But I feel like at that time, people did pick up more hobbies and crafts and becoming really good at something or skills just because there was like so much time that was idle. Nowadays social media sucks up so much of everybody's time. It's kind of ridiculous actually, and like this is something that I talk about very frequently. I try to monitor it, and there's also an app that monitors it, to give you an idea of like how many hours per day are spent on a phone, on social media, and that sort of thing. And it's really up there. Kind of curious to know like what is actually the average amount of time people, they definitely have analytics when it comes to that, without a doubt. So I'm just kind of curious to know like what is the average time spent on their phone on social media per person. I'm gonna say altogether 4 hours per day, like not accounting for, I guess it depends on the type of job that you have. You might actually have free time to browse through things on your phone as well. So it might be even more than 4 hours altogether. Can it be that social media nowadays is the most distracting element of the century? And I would say it's like a safe bet to say yes. Yeah, I really don't think that there was anything else that was so unanimously accepted as a form of distraction. Now, not a lot of people would constantly go to movies at the time, movie theaters being a thing as well. Not everybody owned a television or one that was good quality, for example. Like, people probably listened to radio a lot, but I think at that time that was also limited. I don't think that everything was as 24 hours and as many programs as now, considering time and how many more people jumped on board from that period to becoming like radio hosts and shows and transitioning that into like television and stuff. I still don't think it was as prominent as it is now. So for those of you listening to it, throw out your ideas. Like, what do you think was actually the most distracting element, let's say, in the early 1900s? All the way up to the 50s, because I think after the 50s, more and more people had television, and TV shows were expanding more and more. So like 50s, 60s, 70s, that's I think when the general population was consumed by television. But yeah, like back then, if you were an illustrator, drawing was the distraction. You know, that was the thing that consumed all of your time. Because if you weren't doing that, like, what else are you doing? You know, what else are you? There was no phone nearby for you to pick up and be like, oh, I wonder what's on TV, or I wonder what's on, you know, this or this app or whatever else. Like, that was not an option. You didn't have any phones. Like, in fact, I remember in the 90s, it wasn't around. We didn't have any telephones like that. It was at home. We had a wired telephone or a cordless telephone still. So, you know, if you weren't talking to somebody on the phone, you were watching TV, or if you weren't watching TV, you were doing something else. There was no device nearby at all times for you to like switch to and, you know, entertain yourself for hours, unless it was like your console game or something, right? Like Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis or whatever. So yeah, in some ways, again, this is one of those double-edged sword things, right? Like, where on one hand, it's so great that we have such an amazing tool at our disposal for us to be able to look up things like whether it's medical or traveling. You know, if you're like stranded somewhere, you could pull out Google Maps, and in no time you're back on the road. You know, like, all these things are absolutely amazing. You know, you could stay in contact with your doctors or whatever else, like really important stuff. Get all this information about like weather and where the hurricanes are, and like, you know, a bunch of really beneficial things. But on the other hand, it's like, because there's so much information, because there's so much distraction on there, less and less people really develop any sort of skill. And it's just going from you know, from your work to your phone, to your work to your phone, you know. So unless you're the type of person who is able to mitigate that, or their entire focus is basically creating content on phones or whatever else, you're just kind of, yeah, that's just like your daily routine. And even as like a content creator, I'm still kind of like wary of like how many hours I'm spending looking at screens. You know, I just don't like that aspect of it, you know. So I guess what I'm getting at is, I feel like artists of that time were at an advantage of really developing their skills. Like, there was less stuff around to take away attention, to call for attention, you know, like, oh, what's on here, what's going on here, and what information can I look up, or whatever else. So more of them would just stay in and really hone the skill, really develop it. There's a lot of people out there now who are just very well disciplined and are able to mitigate it well. You know, it's absolutely required if you want to get anywhere with your skill, whether it's illustration or music or anything really. It all heavily depends, extremely depends on your ability to control how you spend your time. And I think that's one of the best lessons that come with the profession. It's just understanding, like, well, you know, for instance, if you're a comic book artist, you have to understand how long it's going to take you to produce a page per day. You know, how many days, you know, at the quality or the level of quality that you can produce at your best, for example. So once you understand that, then things start to clear up a little bit more in terms of, well, I have this window of opportunity to sit down and practice some more and bring myself to the next level. Or I don't. I'm pretty much the entire time sitting and drawing a page for the next day. So I think that pretty much does it for, I'm going to say, for the chin. Just to go over this real quick, this is a great example again of a 3/4 view, and what like the features look like when it comes to it. This is something that, again, something best understood when you're sitting and drawing yourself. When you're practicing it yourself, you're drawing the same 3/4 view over and over, and you start to notice the curvature of the mouth. It doesn't look like this, obviously, in 3/4 view. And since it is, pasted basically onto the face, and the face has its, let's say if all the features were wiped out, it would have like natural curvature to it. And then just indentations would make place for themselves for the features, so indentations for the eye sockets. But aside from all that, everything, it's kind of like an egg shape, right? So when you put on lips on an egg shape, it's going to curve around. So it wouldn't take this full view, and you just have to kind of know, well, how far is it supposed to go in that 3/4 view? It can't go too far. It can't be touching the cheek, because then if you imagine, and this is the benefit of actually understanding all the features on the face in the frontal perspective, right? Because in your mind's eye, then you could start to picture motion. You could be like, okay, well, if it's this long and the face was to turn towards me and have this frontal view, and I drew this corner of the mouth touching this edge right here, then the mouth would be incredibly wide, right? Because as you turn more and more towards the camera, you reveal more parts of the mouth. So just picturing, how much more of it's going to be revealed once the face turns from here to here, already gives you an idea of like, nope, that's not right. That's the incorrect way. So that corner of the mouth starts to hide more and more as it turns away, because of the egg shape of the roundness of the head, of the face. So yeah, this corner of the mouth, just to reiterate, would not be touching the cheek at all. It would be much shorter if I was to draw this line, that line that we were talking about that divides the face equally. As we saw on the frontal view, it divides the lips right in half, right where that arch is on the lips, like that's where that divide starts. So if I was to do that, you could see this half should not be equal to the other in a 3/4 view. It should be a lot shorter, in comparison to this. So that's just something that you could take away from this, because like I said, it varies. The lips vary in terms of, like, let's say the upper lip could be thinner, the bottom lip could be thinner, or both of them could be a lot thicker and more narrow. That all varies. But this concept of what the lips look like in 3/4 view applies to pretty much all forms of face features, so whether the nose is big or small or whatever else, the 3/4 view of the lips is going to have this sort of relationship. One side is going to be short, depending on which side it's angled, whether it's this way or this way. That side is going to be the side that's further away from the camera, that's turning away from the camera, is always going to be shorter than the side that's in view of the camera. And the camera is being the viewer looking directly at the image, right? Or an actual camera. So yeah, that doesn't change no matter what features there are, no matter what, shape or whatever size. And really, that's what I'm trying to teach you guys or talk about in general, is these fundamental principles that don't change. This concept doesn't change despite so many other things having variation. So really that's where I'm getting at, because essentially I want you guys to understand these fundamental principles and create your own style and come up with your own imagery and your own ways of creating faces and scenes and ideas or whatever. That is the ultimate goal here, is for those of you who are learning from the stream, who are picking up on this material. I don't want to teach style. I want to teach the foundations and see your creativity. Essentially that's the most fun part, is to and that's one of the biggest reasons why I encourage the Patreon page and encourage you guys to submit work, because it's interesting to see everybody's different way of drawing. Whether you're a beginner, one beginner is going to draw differently from another beginner, or intermediate is going to draw differently from another intermediate. For instance, their focus, what they're interested in. One person has this sort of interest, another has a different one. So I think that's the beauty of art in general. You get to see everybody's individuality, you get to see everybody's curiosity, and you get to see some interesting line work. So yeah, that's really the biggest goal here. And I'm going to try to highlight all these fundamentals, like these stylistic fundamentals, like things that just apply to every single part of drawing, or every single part, or every type of style, the core foundation. All right, y'all. So, did a lot of ranting today. I am going to have to end the stream for drawing basics. But I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and I will be back for drawing comics. So stick around for that. That's going to be in 5 minutes. And of course, if you guys enjoy this content, feel free to hit the like button and the subscribe button. They both help the stream grow and reach out to a wider audience. And of course, I always appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in just a few.